What can you say about the state of Congress today? Anything?
Well, they're doing very well. They just rated them last week, and they came in last.
Have a great speech.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And he said to me, man, you got to forget about all those other candidates. You just got to forget them. They're all useless. You got to support Ron Paul. And I said, I don't know, who's that? He goes, no, just think about two things. Free markets and the gold standard. He said, that's what's cool. True story. And I was like, wow. I mean, I admire this guy. I was like, all right, let's do this thing. And Ron was at that point running for Senate, I think. But you know, those words, I had no idea. This moment lasted like half a second in time, you know? I didn't know that these words coming out of this guy's mouth, who I said is here, his name is Richard Hunter. It changed my life. Not changed my life, it defined my life. I mean, here I am, I'm still doing the gold standard in free markets after all these years. It's just glorious. But but look, you know, I went to journalism school after that. I'm so honored. My first real job was working for this great man. Damn it, I'm starting to tear up. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to forge ahead. I'm telling you, other people will introduce Ron Paul as a politician, served on the House Banking Committee, author, and everything else. I'll tell you, there's two things I remember most. One was about those years. We didn't have the internet. We had a Reuters ticker feed. He would come into the office in his scrubs. And I said, hey, how did it go? He goes, yeah, I just delivered a baby. I said, what was that? What's that like? And he got all this charming smile on his face, and he looked up there, he goes, every time, it's just miraculous. And he waited, and then he kind of shook it off, and he goes, yeah, what's the price of gold? You know, how many here have been influenced by this man? You among hundreds of millions. First and foremost, this man is a teacher, an educator, a humanitarian, a man who dreams of a free world of universal dignity and human rights. That's who Ron Paul is. If somebody asks you who that is, that's what you tell them. It's my greatest pleasure to introduce to you the great, the immortal Ron Paul.
They said there'd be a few friends here, and I'm glad to hear from you. It's so nice to be here, and it is always nice to talk to an audience that is in agreement and would like to see us change things significantly. And this is something that I've dedicated my life to, because a long time ago I decided our country was going in the wrong direction. And I've changed my tune a little bit on that, but all I can say is much worse than I thought of 35 years ago. It's getting worse, and that's why I like to meet with people who have thought about this, and they need to prepare their own personal lives, their financial lives, as well as think about the real issue. Because even though that is very important, protecting ourselves, the real issue is the opportunities to take care of ourselves dwindle if our freedoms are under attack. And that's the problem. We have to restore liberty, and most of our problems will go away. You know, one of the big issues in the public discourse today in the news, the financial news, is the debt. Everybody knows the debt. I've heard that for a long years. Maybe it'll go on to 100 trillion, who knows? But I have an opinion that we're getting awfully close to where there will be a calamity and there'll be a rush out of the dollar and that debt will be unpayable. Matter of fact, the debt is unpayable now, and all debt, when it gets anywhere near this level, is always liquidated. And there's only two ways you can liquidate the unpayable debt. And that is one, default, or through inflation. Now, the United States government and the Federal Reserve will not quit printing. It's not going to happen. We're going to get rid of the Fed, but in a different manner. But what governments do and what we do constantly on a steady level is that we print money and keep the con game going, and we devalue the dollar. And they say there's no inflation, which is a lie. There's a lot of inflation, especially if you know the right definition for inflation. Inflation isn't something that only the CPI, records. Inflation is when somebody arbitrarily, illegally act like counterfeit and creep money out of thin air, and that's the inflation. And that is the reason this is an economic issue and a moral issue and a liberty issue, why we have to talk about how to protect our financial assets. And we cannot depend on what's happening in Washington. Matter of fact, the only story you can take from what is happening in Washington is the urgency of the need to deal with the monetary issue. There was a statistic the other day I saw that sort of made this point, because there's a lot of examples of debt that you can use. Personal debt and student debt and mortgage debt, the whole works. But this one that caught my attention was people over 60. There's a bunch that owe money, $86 billion for student loans. They're over 60 and they're still paying off their student loans. And that's going to get worse and worse, because the people who have student loans, they've been hinted to that they're not going to be held responsible, and so that is going to get worse. Even though they worked the law in and said if you declare bankruptcy, you can't liquidate that debt. But just the real issue of the unpayable nature of the student debt, it will not be paid for. But the debt and the spending and the size of government is a real mess, and it's not changing much in Congress, except for the fact that somebody else has discovered we have a mess, and now we're electing socialists to the Congress, and believe me, if you want to make something worse, that is what we have to do, more socialism. That's a horrible. But the far left, the new Congress people that just came in, endorse a position that's been around for several months. Matter of fact, it's been known for several years. And it makes a mockery out of logic. And that is the modern monetary theory. Modern monetary theory. Most of you heard about the modern monetary theory? No, not quite yet. Oh, well, it's okay. It's okay. There's a lot of articles now talking about it to accommodate more spending. And you get to thinking, well, why do I tell you not to worry about it? Why you shouldn't have to study modern monetary theory? It's because they've been doing it, especially for 100 years in our country, since we've had our Fed. But they're doing it all over the world, and they've done it throughout history, and it's notoriously popular because some people think they're going to get something for nothing. And people will finally wake up someday and find out that it doesn't work. And yet, politically, you can't ignore the fact that there's a large number of people saying that the solution is more government spending. Now, this monetary theory that they're talking about, they make a couple of precise points more clearly than the other inflationists. They say they had challenged the Austrian School of Economics by arguing the case that money does not originate with free people. Free people deciding what is money and are held responsible for guaranteeing the value of the money. You can't buy cheap. But their theory is that no, that's wrong. Don't let the market decide it. Don't let commodities be used. Don't you let modern technology be used. It's only the government that can make the decision, and it has to be a very, very rigid monopoly, and then you can print endlessly. And the other thing that they're more bold about, but we've been practicing this all along, and can you believe it that even conservative Republicans in Congress spend too much money? I mean, they spend endlessly. So what they're saying now is we want to have the Federal Reserve just print money endlessly because they need more money circulating, so you as a taxpayer pay more taxes to keep this system going. So it is a joke, but that's the kind of answers they have. But every statistic that I look at and everything that I see going on in Washington, we're on the verge of a major calamity. I believe what's coming is much bigger than that mediocre recession we had in 08 and 09, because a mere $15 trillion of passing out and bailing out was able to calm the markets down for another 10 years. But that will end. The debt is much greater, much more malinvestment, much more people involved, and the financial system of the world's the same. This is the first time we've ever lived in a system where we had a fiat currency, a paper money, counterfeit money, that every government has accepted. Nobody's on a gold standard. In World War I and II, in these periods of time, some people, stayed on a sound money system, but nobody is, and that's why there is this great danger. But I got interested in this subject a good while ago, and it wasn't for political reasons. It was for understanding, and I had read Austrian economics in the 1960s, found them fascinating. I thought, boy, these guys are on the right track. So there was the anticipation and the prediction that the Bretton Woods, the pseudo gold standard, the lies that they told there, would end. And lo and behold, 1971, that's exactly what happened. It came to a conclusion, and we had a lot of problems in the 70s as a consequence of that. But everything has just gotten worse. The surprising thing is that the world has been willing to convey confidence for us, the United States, to spend endlessly, run up debt, and print money, and then allow us to have a foreign policy of dictating to other people and in controlling the financial system. So there's a lot of anger out there, a lot of malinvestment, and a lot of people not very happy with what's going on. So once this thing starts to go down in a significant way, I think everybody's going to have to realize that what we will have to need is a reassertion and a re-understanding of the principles of liberty. Liberty can solve our problems. This is something that has gone on in the past, and although people attempted to justify deficits, and one group of conservatives that downplayed the significance of deficit still has a half-decent reputation with conservatives, and that is the supply siders. In their theory, the first half is not too bad, and that is cut taxes. That's good, cut taxes. But don't cut any spending. The supply sider said that with the argument, as long as we cut taxes, the economy will be stimulated, and there'll be enough people generate wealth, and they'll have to send it into the taxes. Well, I think just these last 2 years is an example of what can happen. You can cut taxes, people seem to enjoy it, the economy gets a boost, and the deficit explodes. So, but over the years in Washington, I talked a lot about this, and the one thing is that the people there are not really attuned to economics at all. They don't have an understanding. They're attuned to getting reelected and maintaining power, to maintain the welfare state and also the warfare state. And that's where our big problems are. You know, there's only two. It's not too overwhelming. We only have two groups of people in Washington you have to deal with. And those are the conservatives and the liberals. They're the only people we have to talk to. You know, right now, in a couple of days, Trump's going to have a conference in Vietnam with the North Koreans. I'm all for that. I'm for, bringing troops home, as I've talked about for years. But what is so ironic, and I use this in debates quite frequently, when they would get after me for wanting to bring the troops home and not engage in these wars, and they say, we have to stay and take care of the world because we're so great and good and we need to be there. So isn't it interesting that 60,000 Americans lost their lives, and probably many, many more Vietnamese lost their lives? If you added up what happened, what the French did, then the Americans did, and guess what? We just lost, and we had to panic, and we had to get out, which was a blessing in disguise. And people would say, when they use the argument against me, we have to stay because we don't want the bad guys to come in and come back. Well, what happened in Vietnam? We left there after 20 years of that slaughter. We finally leave, and a lot more was achieved in peace than ever was achieved in the war. That's the Mike Wong? Okay, there we go. Some of the people now are using the argument, as soon as a few people in Congress, and there are a few now, that's saying that we should start to bring troops home. They won a few votes on trying to diminish our involvement in that horrible war in Yemen. But Trump comes along and has a good position, and that is we have 2,000 troops in Syria, not doing much good, causing more harm, and that's not Trump's policy. It was Obama's policy. He's the one in 2011 said we have to get rid of Assad, and that didn't go well. But now Trump said, and Trump did campaign on this. He's all over the place looking for consistency in the foreign policy, but he's very consistent on what he said about coming out of some of these places. So we only have 2,000 troops there, but believe me, that's significant because it's a lot of money and trade. So he's willing to bring them out, and I don't think there's been one soldier that has come out of Syria yet. And there may still be, and let's hope so. But this is the problem was that immediately the neocons would go to Trump and bend his ear and yell and scream, "You can't do this! You can't do this! Al Qaeda is going to come in and take over if we leave." Of course, there's no Al Qaeda there until we got involved. You know, the same way with Iraq. They say you can't leave Iraq because if you leave, Al Qaeda is going to be in there. But that was the reason we went there, and it was all a lie. I don't know. Does anybody know and remember the name Walter Jones? Walter Jones was a close ally of mine, and he just passed away this weekend. And he was a super hawk for Iraq War. He would go to the briefings, and he would listen to them, people like Elliot Abrams and others, and he said they convinced him that Al Qaeda was there and our safety was necessary and we had to go to Iraq, and he voted for the war. It was within a year or so that he came across the truth. He changed his mind. He's one of the very, very rare individuals I ever met in Washington that actually said, you know, I did this, I did it sincerely, I was completely wrong, and he became one of the strongest anti-war people. And he said that the only thing I challenged him on was that he overly punished himself. He felt so much grief because he personally took the responsibility of voting to send our men over there. So he started writing letters to the wives of soldiers that were killed and to families. And he literally wrote thousands and thousands of letters. And he's one person that if we had more people like that, not so much that people have to have the perfect answer, know all the answers to all the subject, but just have somebody who's honest with themselves and then be willing to change their mind. Think of what that would be like if they would discover that our monetary policy, ever since we established the Federal Reserve, is a complete hoax, and it's just runaway, counterfeit, and get people to change their mind. And right now, more and more people are, in spite of a few socialists winning. I think there are people like you out there, and they're around the world. They're in our country. They're in our colleges, and I still go to the campuses. And our message is not dead. The message gets no attention, but there's a lot of people who know exactly what's going on, and it's not complicated. Just like I said, just get rid of two groups, and we'll be okay. But it's not complicated because all we have to do is get people to believe and understand what liberty is all about. People get a chance to own their own life, to do what they want, no matter what they want to do. And everybody says, well, that's chaos. No, the rules are stricter. The strict rules are you can't hurt anybody. You can't steal. You can't counterfeit money. And so that's a different story. But people don't realize that a society without government or very limited government is a very organized society because it's organized by smaller divisions. And this, to me, would be a solution to the monster government. Now, there was a time when I thought our federal government was too big. They were encroaching on the states. And now it's international government. Now, in rhetoric, Donald Trump is criticizes that, but he doesn't quite grasp what non-interventionism is all about. Take 2,000 troops out of here and put them down here. That's not going to work. It's aggression, it's wrong, it's killing, and people suffer. We're broke, and something has to be done. And I think the American people are with us on that issue. The odds of that happening, aren't very good to do it gracefully. I have argued in campaigning that you could do it. If we had a magnificent revival in this country and people understood and wanted to do it, and you had a Congress that would vote against the spending, you wouldn't have to address the subject of food stamps first and thoroughly and say, okay, we have to do it, so we're going to cut everybody off food stamps and get rid of health care for children. After they became dependent for 40 or 50 years, I don't think that would work. That would be revolutionary. But if you don't do anything, that's what's going to happen. But there's still a better way to have a transition. And I've talked a lot about transition in working coalitions. We've worked coalitions in Washington with progressives and liberals who were anti-war overseas. But there's too much politics involved, and then they go along with it. But this idea would be to cut spending, and some of these programs wean somebody off. You could do that without throwing everybody out on the street. You're not going to throw everybody out on the street and say, hey, we're broke, cut off all the Social Security checks tomorrow. Well, no, you won't achieve a libertarian society that way. But what will happen, though, is we'll have the opportunity because they'll be out in the street. And we better convince them that there's a better way than for you just to have more government, because they've caused the trouble and they're not going to make it any better. But the big problem is there's not enough people yet who fully understand you know what a nonviolent society is like. They think that as soon as we leave the world, that is in our occupations in our 150 countries, it'll get much worse. And that's just totally foolish. It would get a lot better. And if we cut the spending in this actually it could be $1 trillion. They say 750 or something on the DOD, but it's a lot more. So why don't you just, you know, cut it? And every year so much and wean off and take the money. And if you come up short, if you have to take care of some kids who have been totally dependent on government health care, you wouldn't have to throw them out in the street and work our way out and condition people. But you know what the odds are of that happening? 0. And yet it's theoretically possible, but we don't have the ammunition to literally change the Congress. The Congress is really bad news. I don't know if you noticed that or not. There was a poll done just this past week or two, and it was listing all the people that ranked popularity contests from the people. And I have to say that the doctors rated the highest. No, the nurses raised higher than the doctor. The medical professionals did pretty well. But the government's about to destroy that because there's no doctor-patient relationship left anymore. But anyway, the medical profession did pretty well. And they had about 20 people listed. And guess who is at the bottom of the list? The U.S. Congress. We're what they deserve, and they deserved it, believe me. They're puppets. They live by the special interests, the lobbyists, and they are coerced into being successful so they can take care of their district. Is they have to listen to the propaganda, they have to listen to the media. So how many times have you heard the media getting up and saying, Donald Trump is not the greatest guy in the world, but he's right on this. He's right on bringing troops home from the Middle East and getting out of the way. And he's wrong in sending more into Yemen. No, you don't ever see that. The established, the part that they believe in is all the same. And if you look at the different stations, it's just total propaganda. That's why when the internet came out, I was rather optimistic about it, that we'd be able to communicate and spread our message. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I even use it carefully. I have my little Ron Paul Liberty Report, and I get my message out. But you have to become a little bit concerned when you find out the true relationship between social media and the U.S. government. That's bad news. And that's a little bit more difficult to deal with because some libertarians will say, well, you can't mess with them. They're a private organization, but they're not a private organization. They were created by the government. And so it's difficult, but I still think there's been a net positive to us to be able to reach people. And even though when I have a lot of people come up, still young people come up and college kids and they get excited and they say, oh, maybe I'd like to do what you did. I think I should run for Congress. He said, what do you think I should? I said, the first advice I'm going to give you is don't run for Congress. Don't do it. But that doesn't mean that political activity can't contribute, because although when I ran concerned about the monetary system in 1973, the first speech I ever gave, I had no thoughts of ever going to Washington. That wasn't it. It was to tell people what I believed and what was going on, and just know that I wouldn't have to give up my medical practice. But my wife cautioned me. She immediately said, why are you doing this? And I explained to her. And she says, no, you're going to get elected, and you're going to mess up our family life. So she was more optimistic or pessimistic, I don't know which. But being involved obviously gave me an opportunity to do what I wanted to do. And it wasn't to be the chairman the Financial Services Committee. And zero desire for that. Now, my friend Walter Jones was well on his way to becoming a major chairman. He had been there a good many years, and he qualified. He got along with people. He still now is complimented for having been one of the friendliest people in Congress. So he was well on his way to moving right up the ladder until he became anti-war. He never got another promotion. They kicked his friends and him off committees. So you toe the line else. There's no real position. Well, does that mean you should be involved? No, I think we should be, and we should find out what's going on and talk about it. It lends itself. But the other reason is to prepare yourself, because you got to know what's coming, and it's going to be pretty hard escaping the government on total. We could handle ourselves if we didn't have the government, but the government's not going to leave us alone. And that's the real problem that we have. They use the internet and every single thing we do, every minute of the day, and then with the crisis coming on, they will become more ruthless. If they could in the 1930s think it was in the interest of the state to take people's gold from them, that was a long time ago when there was supposed to be more freedom. So they will do just about anything. So I hope people in this audience are so smart that they will never have to worry about the IRS worrying about what you do with your finances. Over the years, I've talked about a subject that fascinates me, and that's called talking about the remnant. The remnant was something known in the Bible, but I expand the definition of the remnant, and that is the people that maintain and retain the truths of society. What is good. In your case, honest money. You get together and you talk about it, and you keep that idea alive. So in a way, you become part of the remnant. I thought Solzhenitsyn was just part of a remnant. He was born when communism started in 1918, and yet he lived through all that and survived it. And he came out with a healthy attitude, a brilliant person, well-read. So he was part of the remnant. But one of the most famous remnants in the Bible, story about the remnant, was Isaiah. Isaiah's Job. Anybody hear of the book Isaiah's Job? You should look it up. It's a great story, and it's biblical, but it was one of Murray Rothbard's favorite stories. So it tells a great story. Isaiah was instructed to go out and preach, to the remnant, preach to the masses of people. And but when he was getting his direction, God told him, he says, don't expect anything, because nobody's going to listen to you. You just go out and do it. Because they're out there. There's more out there than you know about. When the message gets out there and it's planted, they will come. They will come to get the message. And so it was irrelevant of how big the crowds were. It was just that his job was to get that message out. And that's quite a bit different in what goes on today with how we handle things. But Isaiah argued, how are they ever going to do it? We get the message out there, and a few people over here and over here. He says, you get the message out there, and you get the principles out there, and the people will come, because they will be starved for the message. And I think that's what's starting to happen right now. Another story in the Bible is Noah. That was a good many years ago. That was a long time even before the Ten Commandments, 1300 BC. And the allegory goes that, society had deteriorated. It was worthless, and God wanted to give up all of them, but we're going to save a few, which would be, for me, the remnant. So they had their way of doing it, or the way to dramatize it, have a Noah's Ark. But Noah was stubborn. He says, no way, this is a crazy idea. And all of a sudden, he told God, he says, they won't come. And God reassured him, you build it, and they will come. And I keep thinking that's what we need to do, with our ideas. We need to build it. And I believe they'll come. Not only because it's the best answer, not only because it's based on morality and integrity, it's built on practicality. And it's built on the fact that what governments and people have done over the centuries is completely wrong. They undermine what individuals achieve. I think we've had such tremendous achievements over the thousands of years, even though the achievements have mostly been, in hundreds of years. Fantastic achievement. But it's always the government that undermines it. Matter of fact, I think of all the modern technology, and it's great. Just think of what we have in spite of all our problems. The technology that we enjoy is so far above, other societies. So it is wonderful. But what always bothered me is that when this technology is developed, we could use as an example nuclear power. Nuclear power. People could have all the clean energy you ever wanted. And but it also can kill more people at one time than ever before. So this is so often the technology. We build jet airplanes and then we use them to build super jets that go and bomb people. So we have to change this attitude and have a belief that technological advancements can be used as an example of how we should advance sociologically, and that is improve ourselves on getting along, get rid of these people who think that we have to use an iron fist to run the world. And I think this is possible. Another little story. This sort of is maybe a little stretch, but there was a movie once that said, "Build it, and they will come." And that of course was The Field of Dreams, which is a movie I like very much. And of course, the story was that building that ball field, the old ball players would come, and the people would come to see them, and it was all such a presentation for the wonderful aspect of American baseball. And I thought it was just a great movie. And of course, when the end comes, he builds it, and they do come. And that's why I think if we build the concept of a free society, they will come. And that should be, our goal. We need to just say a few words about really what liberty should be all about, at least for me. For me, you can't deal with the concept of liberty if you don't accept the non-aggression principle. You can't initiate violence. You can't lie, cheat, or steal. Kill. But that issue has been around for a long time. Hammurabi and the Ten Commandments talk about don't lie, cheat, or steal. But then there's ups and downs of society. Governments come, I think they come and undermine the principles of the people that have them, but they're being undermined. But in many ways, we keep moving forward. I mean, we are so more modernized than ever before, but not in some of the areas that I think are important. So this is something that there's no reason for us to be despondent. I think the goal, this is my personal goal, in that what we should do as individuals, because if we release all the creative energy of individuals and you have a rule and a law and you can't hurt other people, you can't steal, you have to work hard and take care of yourself. But if you do that, the whole purpose would be that it would be a more peaceful, prosperous world. And that is something I am totally convinced of. It would be. But the whole thing is, once again, back to a few, maybe more than a few, conservatives and liberals, they always want to violate the law. Not totally and completely, just here and there. Some will say, well, I think you're okay on this free market stuff. I heard it so often. It became nauseating in the presidential campaign. Well, I like your economics and all that, and cutting my taxes, but you've got to wise up. You want America to go down the drain. That's unpatriotic, and you don't care about the troops. And what I tried to point out to him. Why was it I was getting more donations from the troops than anybody else? Well, no, I think the goal should be for us to strive for excellence, and you can't do that in a non-free society because government controls everything, and you have a much better chance. And I think virtue is something that is not definable, but everybody knows what it is. I think that should be a goal. But if you have a society that concentrates on that and get it out of the hands of the government can't teach you to be excellent or virtuous. Once they start teaching us and saying, what we need to do is keep you from harming yourself, you cannot have government prevent you from injuring yourself in a free society. And even if they try, they just make it much worse. I think the other thing that people get hung up on, both the liberals and the conservatives, and it's messier now than ever. It used to be you could define a conservative and liberal, but it all depends on who's in power. It's always just now a power struggle because there's too much bipartisanship now. The bipartisan support for the Fed, the deficit financing, and the wars is too much bipartisanship. So it's something that we have to deal with. But the part where people have trouble, if you say, well, we're going to apply this rule across the board, and conservatives say, that's good, I can go out and make money and I don't have to pay taxes, and I won't cheat or steal or none of it. And so he goes for that. But then when he wants to start manipulating people's personal lives, personal lifestyles or religion or anything else, that's where the problem comes from. But then you talk to the liberal and the progressives. I have some progressives I work very closely. And they were pretty darn good on the war issue and pretty good on civil liberties. But my God, they said in free markets, look at what would happen. All the banks would be taken over. They don't realize that the mess they're talking about has nothing to do with liberty. The mess we have is cronyism and is fascism and interventionism, and we're getting a bad rap for it. One little booklet that I use as an important guide that I tell people to read and understand because it teaches only one real message, and that is the message of Bastia in the law. And that is not complicated. And it's so simple. It just fits into my little story. And Bastia, in the 1850s, just as they knew thousands of years ago what we shouldn't be doing, but Bastia said simply, and it is true today, even we have a lot of complaints, most people accept this idea that you don't hurt other people. I bet you haven't been living next door to many neighbors who thought, well, the proper way to get something is to take from your house every night when you go to bed. Now, most people recognize you're not supposed to lie and cheat and steal and kill people. The problem is that the government does it all the time. They lie to us for wars. They cheat us all the time. They counterfeit our money. They hurt us. We have a justice system which is horrible. We put people in prison for a lifetime for nonviolent drug activity. That's horrible. The justice system is totally rebellious. So other than that, I think we're doing great. Now, I do basically, you can look at it on two sides, but I think the opportunity is there. The 60s were a tough time. A lot of Americans were dying, a lot of people were dying. People are still dying, not as many. But in the 70s, it was a washout of an economic system that adjusted itself and is living now with an extended ability to survive for a little while longer. But we have a little bit of time, but we don't know. People always want to know, Ron, I think you're right. I think you're on the right track. But when's this thing going to come down on our heads? I said, I hope it isn't tomorrow. But it could be. But it's not likely to be that fast. But the truth is, you don't know, because there is a psychological factor. There's the fear factor and what governments do and all these other kind of things that precipitates panics. But it will come. You can predict the situation when you have a friable economic system and it's unstable, and then you know it won't stand. It's like you've spotted all the cracks in the basement concrete, and yet the house is still standing there, the building is standing there, but what we see down below, it ain't gonna last long. That's what's happening. But we have an opportunity. That's why I want to encourage you to do your work, do your preservation, but don't forget about putting effort and energy into the preservation of liberty. Thank you very much. Thank you.